So now we've gone over most of the things that are relevant to the basic project management plan, but there's a few more things that we need to complete in order to have a comprehensive plan. So the question is, what else do we need? Well, we need a project communication plan. We need to determine the project risk. We need to look at this thing called reserves or contingencies. And then we need to look at a project procurement plan. And what does that actually mean? So we shall begin looking at communications. It's often said that the three most important things in project management are communications, communications, and communications. There's a wise saying to do with communications, and that is fundamentally to think that that someone's actually heard what you've communicated. So one of the things you need to do when you make a communication plan, you need to determine the what. What are you going to say? When are you going to say it? How are you going to say it? How often you're going to say it? And to whom are you going to say it to? So make sure that your message has some value to it and not just an email sent out to broadcast to everyone, right? And when are you going to do it? The frequency should be the frequency of the recipient. When would that individual like to get the message? How are you going to do it? What sort of form? Is it going to be verbal, face-to-face? Is it going to be on a website? Is it going to be an email? Those things are actually how you're going to do it, and may differ depending on who your stakeholders are. How often, the frequency, and the person needs it every minute, every hour, every day, every week, every month, every year. And to whom? And it's crucial to understand that some people want to know, some people don't want to know. So it's better to go and to figure out to whom are you going to communicate. Now, the question here is, wow, how the heck do I figure this all out? Well, remember way back when we talked about stakeholder analysis, and I talked about that you have an interview with him? With whoever your stakeholder are, what you do at that particular point in time is you ask these questions. We're going to have communications throughout our project. How would you like to? What would you like to see? When would you like to see it? What frequency? All those sorts of things. You ask that as part of that interview that you do way back with your stakeholders, and then implement that plan. In project management, we do a lot of planning, and we have a lot of templates that we use. And you'll find under the resource area of this course, you'll find many of the templates that I'm going to refer to in the next few little slides here. But simply, templates are there to guide you, to help you take them, modify them, use them the way you want to. But this particular template for the communication planning is basically to describe the purpose of it, who the owner is, the person who needs to carry it out, and what you're going to use in the frequency. Just a guideline for you to reference back to how you're going to communicate with all your stakeholders. We're next going to explore the wonderful world of reserves, or often called contingencies. Reserves or contingencies. Interesting topic, this unto itself, is that in many organizations, the organization has determined that for every project they're going to allow what's called a contingency. It's basically an overrun. They'll say, well, our contingency, because we don't know what we don't know, we're going to allow 10% overrun. We're going to allow whatever the budget is, add 10% on it, 15% or 20%. The challenge that comes with that is, for example, if you have $1 million budget and you turn around and you have 10%, you now have $1,100,000 allocated to that project. Now, project managers are pretty clever. They'll go spend the $1.1 million, even though they may not need it. May not need it for things that the contingency is aimed to overcome. The better way to look at this is actually coming up with a reserve. The reserve takes two areas or two components of a reserve or contingency reserve, amount retained to cover known cost. So for example, when we do risk planning and we have a plan for the risk, we need to produce a cost estimate for those particular risk plans. And then what we need to do is then allocate that fund as a reserve but don't draw on that reserve until the risk actually occurs. So it's not added to our budget. It's just sitting there. The organization will keep that money set aside, but we only get access to that money when the risk actually occurs. We draw it out as we need it. That's a reserve. And then we have this other thing called the management reserve. It's the amount retained to cover unknown risk. This is your traditional contingency, the 5 or 10%. Again, this should only be allocated, not given. It should be reserved, either if it's 5 or 10% or whatever the management reserve is in your organization, but it shouldn't be drawn on unless it qualifies as an unknown risk. Now we have our known risk, which we have our contingency reserve for. If it's not part of that, then that's where we draw this other management reserve from for the unknown risk. And only then. So what we basically have is we have our budget of, say, $1 million, as I alluded to earlier, but we don't add any extra money on that. We just reserve that money, and we only draw on it when these things occur, either a known risk or unknown risk. Now this becomes much more financially responsible for projects and holds the project managers more accountable to doing better estimates for what it actually costs to do that. So it's a wonderful tool. I suggest that if you don't have it in your organization, you might want to talk to a few people and see if there's something that they'd like to implement. This is the end of this video. Up next, we're going to discuss procurement.